Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The 7,219th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is letter dated 28th February 2014 from the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, addressed to the President of the Security Council, S/2014/136. The agenda is adopted. At the outset of the meeting, I should like, on behalf of the members of the Security Council, to express the deepest sympathy and condolences to the families of those who lost their lives aboard Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 on 17th July 2014, and also to the people and governments of all those countries who lost their citizens in the crash. I now ask that all those present stand and join in observing a minute of silence in the memory of those who lost their lives. Thank you. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Belgium, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Netherlands, the Philippines, and Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Jeffrey Feltman, Under Secretary General for Political Affairs, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Jeffrey Feltman. So you have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, as we face a rapidly deteriorating crisis in Ukraine that bears consequences far beyond the country's borders, we deeply regret that the glimpse of hope that followed the announcement of President Poroshenko's peace plan, including the unilateral ceasefire and peace talks with the armed groups, has quickly dissipated. In my briefing to you today, I will focus on developments in eastern Ukraine, as well as on international efforts toward a peaceful resolution. First, the situation in eastern Ukraine. While the UN has at this point no independent verification of the circumstances regarding the tragic crash yesterday of a Malaysian Airlines passenger plane, the Secretary General is alarmed at what seem to be credible, numerous reports that suggest that a sophisticated surface-to-air missile was used. The Secretary General strongly condemns this apparent deliberate downing of a civilian aircraft. This horrifying incident serves as the starkest reminder of how dire the situation in eastern Ukraine has become and how it affects countries and families well beyond Ukraine's borders. Nearly 300 innocent people from many countries, some of whom are represented by members of this Council, were killed. The casualties include a professional staff member of the World Health organization. And I was shocked to learn just now that nearly 2/3 of the victims come from the Netherlands, and that there were 80 children on board that flight. We convey our deepest condolences to the families and friends of the victims. The Secretary General stated yesterday that there is clearly a need for a full and transparent international investigation. The United Nations is fully ready to cooperate. We have been in touch yesterday and today with ICAO, and ICAO has offered to Ukrainian officials its investigative capacity in order to put together an international team. ICAO and Ukrainian officials are speaking today, and the Secretary General is scheduled to speak with Ukrainian President Poroshenko tomorrow. Following the 30 June announcement by President Poroshenko of the end of the 10-day ceasefire and subsequent resumption of the security and law enforcement operation in the eastern parts of the country, the fighting between government forces and armed groups has intensified dangerously, resulting in numerous deaths. According to the Ukrainian authorities, a number of towns, including notably the cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, as well as various smaller villages in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, have been returned to their control. However, relentless fighting has continued, particularly in and around the cities of Lugansk and Donetsk, where the armed groups appear to have consolidated their presence. Earlier this week, a fierce battle was also fought over the international airport in Lugansk that now appears under the Ukrainian government's control. The situation on and around the border between Ukraine and the Russian Federation is of particular concern. While it is impossible for the United Nations to independently verify these accounts, in recent days, a number of fatal incidents as well as intense fighting have been reported. On 13 July, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation issued a statement noting that one Russian national died and 2 were seriously injured when a Ukrainian army shell hit a residential house. Ukraine has rejected this claim. In the same statement, the ministry also warned that tensions in the area of the Russian-Ukrainian border have dangerously escalated and may have irreversible consequences for which Ukraine will be held responsible. According to the Ukrainian authorities, the country's border guard units have reportedly come under continuous attack with rockets and mortars by armed groups. There are also reports that several Ukrainian military aircraft have been shot down over the past weeks, most recently on 16 July. As the Secretary General has reiterated on countless occasions, armed groups need to disarm immediately and stop engaging in unlawful and violent acts. At the same time, we continue to urge strongly the Ukrainian authorities to act with maximum restraint and to make every effort possible to ensure the protection of civilians caught in the fighting. Estimations of the total number of civilian casualties vary, but according to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, there have been approximately 500 casualties so far and 1,400 injured. Furthermore, UNHCR estimates that the crisis has displaced some tens of thousands of people as of 11 July. Grievances can and must never justify endangering the lives of those one claims and aims to represent and protect. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, the Secretary General welcomes the intensive diplomatic efforts undertaken by many members of this Council and others in recent weeks with a view to de-escalating the crisis. The 2nd July joint Berlin Declaration agreed upon by the foreign ministers of the Russian Federation, Germany, France, and Ukraine, similar to the 17 April Geneva Statement, provides a clear and constructive way forward. As the declaration underlines, there's an urgent need for a sustainable ceasefire in eastern Ukraine to be agreed and fully observed by all concerned, as well as to secure and effectively control the Russian-Ukrainian border. As the fighting continues However, we are disconcerted by the apparent lack of tangible progress toward a political solution. A first critical step would be the immediate resumption of a ceasefire. The Secretary General calls on the international community to come together in support of Ukraine in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter and to preserve peace and security for the broader region. We will continue to do our part. The Secretary General is in close contact with world leaders and has asked me to return to Kiev and Moscow in the coming days in the spirit of his good offices. Establishing a path to peace in Ukraine, as in areas of conflict elsewhere in the world, requires a concerted effort by national actors from across the political spectrum, backed by strong and unified support of the international community. While the security, political, economic, social, and human rights issues in Ukraine that should be addressed are indeed complicated, we hope that the shock of the downing of the civilian passenger jet yesterday will prompt a serious and sustained effort to end the fighting and concentrate positively on Ukraine's future. Mr. President, thank you.
I thank Mr. Feldman for his briefing. I now give the floor to members of the Security Council. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, we meet today in the most tragic of circumstances. Yesterday, Malaysia Airlines passenger plane MH17 appears to have been shot down over eastern Ukraine, killing all passengers and crew. Our deepest, most heartfelt condolences go to the families of the victims and to the people and governments of those countries affected. In the United Kingdom, we are mourning the loss of at least 9 British citizens who were passengers on this flight. This is a dark moment for the international community. The senseless violence unleashed by armed separatists in eastern Ukraine has reached monstrous proportions. Mr. President, the precise circumstances and causes of this tragic event must be established quickly and beyond any doubt. As the Council has affirmed this morning, this will require a full, thorough and independent international investigation in accordance with international civil aviation guidelines. The International Civil Aviation Organization, which provides the international legal framework for the investigation of air accidents, should have a central role ensuring that there is credible and independent international involvement. We welcome the indications from the Ukrainian authorities that they want international investigators to join their efforts. The United Kingdom will provide whatever assistance is necessary to support this investigation. The immediate priority has to be for investigators to gain access to the crash site so they can start their work. They must be able to operate unhindered and in security. There must be no interference or tampering with the evidence. Armed separatist groups in the vicinity must allow such access. Despite assurances that were made yesterday evening, we understand that this has not yet happened. We call on Russia to use its influence with these groups to ensure that this happens. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, already present in eastern Ukraine, can play a key role in facilitating and safeguarding this access. Mr. President, early indications are that Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was brought down by a surface-to-air missile. MH17 is not the first aircraft that has been brought down in this area. On 14 June, armed separatists claimed responsibility for, indeed gloated publicly over, the shooting down of a Ukrainian IL-76 transport aircraft with the loss of all 49 on board. On 14 July, armed separatists shot down an AN-26 transport aircraft with a surface-to-air missile. And on 16 July, a Ukrainian Sukhoi 25 jet was shot down in circumstances which have yet to be fully clarified. Mr. President, we have to ask searching questions about why we are now confronting this tragic situation. Russian officials have claimed that armed separatists in eastern Ukraine represent a spontaneous local insurgency. We know that that is not the case. We know that the three leading figures of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic are Russian citizens and have come from outside Ukraine. We know that weapons, equipment and logistical support has been systematically provided to armed separatist groups by Russia, including up to 100 manpads, 15 to 25 main battle tanks, not to mention artillery pieces, rocket launchers and other armoured vehicles. The United Kingdom urges Russia to reflect carefully on the situation they have created. We urge Russia to cease its policy of supporting armed separatist groups and their violent actions, of destabilising a neighbouring country, of generating displacement and social and economic hardship. Let us hear today clear and unequivocal condemnation from Russia of the actions of these armed groups. These armed groups do not represent the people of Ukraine. Without Russian support, they would wither. Mr. President, it is the Council's responsibility to respond to such tragedies by drawing the right lessons and working together with commitment and conviction to prevent their repetition. It is clear where responsibility lies, with the senseless violence of armed separatists and with those who have supported, equipped and advised them. The Council must be united in condemning these actions and in demanding that these groups disarm, desist from violence and intimidation, and engage in dialogue through the democratic mechanisms that are available to them. They have been given the opportunities to do so, most recently through President Poroshenko's peace plan. These opportunities have all been spurned. In the press statement agreed earlier today, the members of the Security Council expressed their condolences and called for an international investigation and appropriate accountability. This is welcome, but it is not enough. The Council must go further. It should come together behind a clear demand that the armed separatist groups should lay down their arms and pursue whatever political legitimate objectives they may have through exclusively peaceful and democratic means. That the flow of arms, fighters and logistical support to the armed separatists is fully halted and the borders secured. In the light of yesterday's tragedy, any other course of action would be unconscionable. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Chad.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais remercier Monsieur Jeffrey Feltman, sous-secrétaire général, pour sa présentation sur les derniers événements tragiques en Ukraine. Le Tchad exprime sa profonde compassion et présente ses condoléances aux familles de 298 personnes victimes du crash de l'avion de ligne de la compagnie Malaysia Airlines. Cet événement tragique affecte la paix et la sécurité de toute la communauté internationale de par la diversité des nationalités des victimes. Quelle que soit l'origine et les auteurs de cet accident, ce sont des vies humaines qui sont en cause et le Tchad unit sa voix à celle de la communauté internationale pour demander qu'une enquête internationale complète et transparente soit diligentée pour élucider les circonstances de l'accident et établir les responsabilités de cette catastrophe. À cet égard, nous saluons la disponibilité des autorités ukrainiennes à élargir l'enquête aux experts internationaux indépendants. En ces moments de douleur et de sensibilité extrême, le Tchad réitère son appel à toutes les parties en présence au calme et à la retenue et exhorte les pays ayant une influence sur les parties en conflit à la recherche du dialogue et de la réconciliation. Le Tchad prend acte de l'annonce faite par les insurgés d'observer un cessez-le-feu pour permettre l'évacuation des corps et de la volonté de mise en œuvre du plan de paix par le gouvernement ukrainien afin de jeter les bases d'un dialogue politique inclusif, seule voie possible de règlement de cette crise grave. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Chad for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday, we were all shocked by the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. All 298 people aboard, 283 passengers and 15 crew were killed. As we stared at the passenger lists yesterday, we saw next to 3 of the passengers' names a capital I. As we now know, the letter I stands for infant. To the families and friends of the victims, it is impossible to find words to express our condolences. We can only commit to you that we will not rest until we find out what happened. A full, credible, and unimpeded international investigation must begin immediately. The perpetrators must be brought to justice. They must not be sheltered by any member state of the United Nations. Let me share with you our assessment of the evidence so far. We assess Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, carrying these 298 people from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, was likely downed by a surface-to-air missile, an SA-11, operated from a separatist-held location in eastern Ukraine. The airliner was traveling at a cruise altitude of 33,000 feet, and its speed was typical for an airliner along an established flight corridor frequented by commercial traffic. The flight was transmitting its assigned transponder code corresponding with its flight plan, and flight tracking data was publicly available on the internet. There was nothing threatening or provocative about MH17. Of the operational SAM systems located near the border, only the SA-11, SA-20, and SA-22 SAM systems are capable of hitting an aircraft at this flight's altitude of 33,000 feet. We can rule out shorter-range SAMs known to be in separatist hands, including Manpad's SA-8 and SA-13 systems, which are not capable of hitting an aircraft at this altitude. Early Thursday, an SA-11 SAM system was reported near Snizne by a Western reporter, and separatists were spotted hours before the incident with an SA-11 system at a location close to the site where the plane came down. Separatists initially claimed responsibility for shooting down a military transport plane and posted videos that are now being connected to the Malaysian Airlines crash. Separatist leaders also boasted on social media about shooting down a plane, but later deleted these messages. Because of the technical complexity of the SA-11, it is unlikely that the separatists could effectively operate the system without assistance from knowledgeable personnel. Thus, we cannot rule out technical assistance from Russian personnel in operating the systems. The Ukrainians do have SA-11 systems in their inventory. However, we are not aware of any Ukrainian SAM systems in the area of the shootdown. And, more importantly, since the beginning of this crisis, Ukrainian air defenses have not fired a single missile, despite several alleged violations of their airspace by Russian aircraft. This also follows a pattern of actions by Russian-backed separatists. On June 13th, separatists shot down a Ukrainian transport plane carrying 40 paratroopers and 9 crew. On June 24th, as this council was meeting to welcome Ukraine's unilateral ceasefire, we received word that separatists downed a Ukrainian helicopter, killing all 9 on board. On July 14th, separatists claimed credit for the downing of a Ukrainian military cargo plane, flying at 6,000 meters, and on July 16th, they claimed credit for the downing of a Ukrainian fighter jet. If indeed Russian-backed separatists were behind this attack on a civilian airliner, they and their backers would have good reason to cover up evidence of their crime. Thus, it is extremely important that an investigation be commenced immediately. In the first instance, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission should act as a first responder, laying the foundation for efforts by other international organizations and individual nations, including those whose citizens were victims of this tragedy. Yesterday, President Obama assured Ukraine's President Poroshenko that U.S. experts will offer all possible assistance upon his request. President Poroshenko has invited the independent and credible International Civil Aviation Organization to join an investigation. International investigators must be granted immediate, full, and unfettered access to the crash site. All those concerned, Russia, pro-Russian separatists, and Ukraine, should agree to support an immediate ceasefire to facilitate access by international investigators. In this regard, we look to the SMM also to reach agreement with separatists and others in the region to make this possible. All evidence must remain undisturbed, and any evidence removed from the site by the Russian-backed separatists operating in the area should be promptly returned and handed over. Russia needs to help make this happen. While it may take us some time to firmly establish who shot down a plane filled with innocents, most council members and most members of the international community have been warning for months about the devastation that would come if Russia did not stop what it started, if it did not rein in what it unleashed. The context for yesterday's horror is clear. Separatist forces backed by the Russian government continue to destabilize Ukraine and undermine the efforts of Ukraine's elected leaders to build a democratic Ukraine that is stable, unified, secure, and able to determine its own future. Russia says that it seeks peace in Ukraine, but we have repeatedly provided this council with evidence of Russia's continued support to the separatists. Time after time, we have called on the Russian government to de-escalate the situation by stopping the flow of fighters and weapons into Ukraine, pressing separatists to agree to a ceasefire and release all hostages, and support a roadmap for negotiations. Time after time, President Putin has committed to working toward dialogue and peace. In Geneva, in April, in Normandy in June, and in Berlin earlier this month, and every single time he has broken that commitment. Here is what we know. In the last few weeks, Russia has increased the number of tanks, armored vehicles, and rocket launchers in southwest Russia. More advanced air defense systems have also arrived. Moscow has recently transferred Soviet-era tanks and artillery to the separatists, and several military vehicles crossed the border. After recapturing several Ukrainian cities last weekend, Ukrainian officials discovered caches of weapons long associated with Russian stockpiles, including manpads, mines, grenades, MREs, vehicles, and a pontoon bridge. Ukrainian forces have discovered large amounts of other Russian-provided military equipment, including accompanying documentation verifying the Russian origin in the areas that they have liberated from separatists in recent days. Recruiting efforts for separatist fighters are expanding inside Russia, and separatists have openly said that they are looking for volunteers with experience operating heavy weapons such as tanks and air defenses. Russia has allowed officials from the Donetsk People's Republic to establish a recruiting office in Moscow. Ukrainian pilot Nadia Savchenko, who has long had a distinguished career in the Ukrainian military, was taken by separatists in mid-June. She is now being held, where? In a prison in Voronezh, Russia. According to the Ukrainian government, she was transferred to Russia by separatists. Russia continues to redeploy new forces extremely close to the Ukrainian border. In addition, this past Monday, a Ukrainian Air Force cargo plane was shot down in Ukrainian airspace, and on Wednesday, a Ukrainian fighter jet was also shot down in Ukrainian airspace. In both instances, the Ukrainian government believes that these planes were fired on from Russian territory. It is because of these continued destabilizing Russian actions that the United States imposed sanctions on the defense, energy, and financial sectors of the Russian economy, including financial institutions. These measures include freezing the assets of Russian defense companies and blocking new financing of some of Russia's most important banks and energy companies. These sanctions are significant, but they are also targeted, designed to have the maximum impact on the Russian calculus while limiting the impact on the Russian people and limiting any spillover effects on our interests or those of our allies. The European Union has also announced expanded sanctions against Russia this week. The message is unified and clear. If President Putin continues to choose escalation over de-escalation, the international community will continue to impose costs on Russia. But this is not what any of us want. We and our allies remain committed to a diplomatic solution, as are the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people, who have seen their neighbors, friends, and family members killed in a needless conflict. President Poroshenko has consistently backed up his words with actions. He proposed a comprehensive peace plan and declared a unilateral ceasefire, both of which were cynically rejected by the illegal armed groups and their backers in Moscow. President Poroshenko's plan offered amnesty to separatists who lay down their arms voluntarily and who are not guilty of capital crimes. He committed to providing a safe corridor for Russian fighters to return to Russia. He established a job creation program for the affected areas, included an offer of broad decentralization and dialogue with eastern regions, including the promise of early local elections, and granted increased local control over language, holidays, and customs. President Poroshenko also has reached out to the residents of eastern Ukraine and is pursuing constitutional reform which will give local regions more authority to choose their regional leaders and protect locally spoken languages. He has said he will meet with separatists at any safe location, inside or outside of Ukraine. The United States' goal throughout the crisis in Ukraine has been consistent: to support a stable, peaceful, and democratic Ukraine. We will not be satisfied with a temporary halt to violence. Russia must stop destabilizing Ukraine and allow all of the people of Ukraine to decide their country's future through a democratic political process. As we sit here, the remains of nearly 300 people, of innocent infants, children, women, and men, are strewn across a blackened, smoldering landscape in Ukraine. Those victims came from at least 9 different nations. They could just as easily have come from any of ours. We must treat all of them as our own victims. We have a duty to each and every one of those individuals, their families, and their countries to determine why that jet fell out of the sky and to hold the perpetrators accountable. We must stop at nothing to bring those responsible to justice. This appalling attack occurred in the context of a crisis that has been fueled by Russian support for separatists through arms, weapons, and training, and by the Russian failure to follow through on its commitments, and by its failure to adhere to the fundamental principles of the UN Charter. This tragedy only underscores the urgency and determination with which we insist that Russia immediately take concrete steps to de-escalate the situation in Ukraine, support a sustainable ceasefire, and follow the path toward peace that the Ukrainian government has consistently offered. This war can be ended. Russia can end this war. Russia must end this war.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I give the floor now to the representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're deeply shocked by yesterday's downing of the Malaysian Airlines Boeing 777 in eastern Ukraine. We express our sincere condolences to Malaysia, the Netherlands, Australia, Indonesia, UK, Germany, Belgium, the Philippines, Canada, and other nations, those citizens were among the 295 people who perished. Our deepest sympathies go to the families of the victims. The circumstances of the downing must be established through an independent international investigation in accordance with international civil aviation guidelines. Perpetrators cannot escape responsibility. Investigators must be immediately granted access to the crash site and the black boxes hanging it over to independent authorities in order to avoid tampering with evidence. The circumstances are impossible to ignore. All point in one direction: a horrible crime committed as part of the armed aggression against Ukraine. The responsibility for this terror act lies on those who aggressively prevent Ukraine to effectively exercise its sovereign rights over its territory and airspace. It would not have happened had Russia not armed and instigated bands of separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk provinces. International community cannot stand by in the face of such aggression. The country has become a threat to international peace and security. We have been saying that all along, since the occupation of Crimea. Mr. President, mere facts. The debris of Malaysian plane lies in the area controlled by pro-Russian separatists. This recent weeks alone, the Ukrainian cargo plane An-26 and fighter jet Su-25 were shot down by pro-Russian separatists from high altitude. The third Malaysian passenger plane was deliberately shot down. Il-76 transport plane and half a dozen helicopters were downed by pro-Russian fighters at Luhansk airport and elsewhere. In June, the separatists boasted of holding the SA-11 Buk missile system. They claimed to have used the system to shoot down the An-26 cargo plane at high altitude. The separatist commander, Igor Strelkov, claimed to the media to have shot down another aircraft at the same time when the Malaysian Airlines flight was overflying the area. Mr. President, we are truly shocked by the number of victims among the civilian population in eastern Ukraine. Armed separatists, terrorists, and foreign fighters and their supporters bear the responsibility for the deaths and injuries among the civilian population, including children, women, elderly. The carnage must end. President Poroshenko offered the peace plan. Ukraine announced a unilateral ceasefire. The agreement in Berlin on July 2nd provided vehicle for the talks. Yet separatists and terrorists in east of Ukraine went on sowing terror, looting, robbing banks, racketeering, kidnapping, trafficking in humans. A massive and continuous influx of foreign fighters went unabated from across the Russian border into neighboring Luhansk and Donetsk. Along came T-65 tanks, Grad multiple rocket launchers, anti-aircraft guns, Taut anti-aircraft, anti-tank guns, BTR APCs, manpads, small arms. In fact, terrorists in Donbass hardly care to remove from their heavy weapons the markings of the Russian military units. Russian military helicopters and drones violate the Ukrainian space, as 40,000 troops are tented within minutes of Ukrainian border, in addition to 20,000 stationed in the occupied Crimea. Russian citizens, many of them veterans of conflicts in Chechnya and Transnistria, lead many of the terrorist groups. The Russian media channels pour assiduous anti-Ukrainian propaganda. The mouthpiece of the separatists, Live News, brags of the agility of rebels to shoot down any plane in sight. Any plane. Hostage-taking by the terrorists and separatists continues. The abducted and hooded Ukrainian pilot, Nadia Savchenko, was trafficked by separatists from Ukraine straight into Russian Voronezh pre-trial detention center. We condemn the unlawful detention of Ukrainian citizens in Ukraine. Russia must respect the norms of international law and release Savchenko immediately. We remain appalled by the deterioration in human rights situation in Crimea. Mr. President, Lithuania urges to conduct a full and thorough and independent investigation into downing of Malaysian Airlines flight, as agreed today by the Council. Lithuania urges Russia to unequivocally distance itself from any kind of direct or indirect support of the terrorists, separatists, or foreign fighters. Insurgents must lay down their weapons. Lithuania calls on Russia to collaborate with Ukraine to ensure security of the borders and to prevent weapons and armed terrorists from entering territory of Ukraine. We call on Russia to constructively cooperate in the implementation of the peace plan put forward by President Petro Poroshenko. Diplomatic solution is possible. Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within the internationally recognized borders, including Crimea, are non-negotiable and must be respected by all. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for his statement. Give the floor now to the representative of China.
主席先生，我感谢菲尔特曼副秘书长的通报。中方对马来西亚航空公司 MH17 号航班在乌克兰东部坠毁感到震惊和痛心。我谨代表中国政府和人民向遇难者表示深切哀悼，向他们的家属表示诚挚慰问。国际民用航空安全必须得到确保。当前重点是查明真相。在查明真相前，各方都不宜匆忙作出结论。 进行主观推断或相互指责。我们支持对此次事件进行独立、公正和客观的调查。我们也呼吁各方对调查予以配合和合作。近期，乌克兰局势持续动荡，武装冲突和暴力事件频发，造成人员伤亡和财产损失。中方对此深表关注，希望各方从维护乌克兰各族人民利益考虑，从维护地区和平稳定大局出发，采取冷静、克制态度，避免冲突和对抗加剧。乌克兰危机涉及复杂的历史经纬和现实，政治解决是化解乌克兰危机的唯一出路。中方注意到，乌克兰危机有关各方近期为实现停火对话、推动政治解决所做的建设性努力，希望有关各方坚持对话与谈判，充分照顾乌克兰国内各地区各民族的正当权益和诉求，兼顾有关各方合理关切，实现各方的利益平衡。我们敦促有关各方切实落实停火共识，在日内瓦共识等倡议基础上加强对话协商，寻求全面政治解决方案，早日实现乌克兰的稳定与发展。中方尊重包括乌克兰在内的所有国家的主权和领土完整，将继续秉持公正、客观立场，积极参与任何有助于局势缓解和推动政治解决的方案和倡议，并发挥建设性作用。谢谢主席先生。
I thank the representative of China. I give now the floor to the representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The grounding of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 into Ukrainian territory on 17 July has shocked the world. We have witnessed the tragic death of 298 people. There were 28 Australians on board MH17. Our nation is in mourning for all of the victims. The news that the lives of 80 children have been lost is devastating. Flags will be flown at half-mast tomorrow across Australia. We extend our heartfelt sympathy and condolences to the families of all of the victims of this tragedy and to their countries of nationality. Our particular thoughts are with the governments and people of the Netherlands and Malaysia. There is mounting evidence that the crash was caused by a missile strike and was downed in territory not controlled by Ukrainian authorities, and mounting credible information that this was conducted by separatist militia groups acting with the assistance of others. We owe it to the victims of this tragedy and their families to unequivocally establish the facts behind this incident, to find out exactly what happened and who is responsible. If, as appears increasingly likely, flight MH17 was brought down by a missile, then this is, as Australia's Prime Minister Tony Abbott has said, an unspeakable crime, and the perpetrators must be brought swiftly to justice. There must be a full, thorough and impartial international investigation. We thank Under Secretary General Feltman for his message that the UN is fully ready to cooperate with any investigation, and that ICAO has offered its investigative capacity. We also welcome Mr. Feltman's advice that ICAO and the government of Ukraine are speaking regarding the issue of an investigation. There must be immediate preservation of the crash site and unfettered access for independent investigators. Safe access must also be provided to allow recovery of the bodies of those who have lost their lives in this tragedy. Undertakings brokered by the Trilateral Contact Group with armed separatists that control the territory in which the crash occurred to allow access must be upheld. Our Prime Minister has made it clear that Russia's full cooperation with all investigations is expected. The Council has just issued a press statement calling for investigation, accountability and for immediate access to the crash site. This is very welcome. But Australia believes, given the gravity of the incident, that it is not sufficient indication of the Council's resolve. Australia believes the Council should adopt a resolution which reinforces the need for access to be granted to the crash site and for a full, thorough, independent and international investigation to be carried out. Mr. President, this is the 19th time that this Council has met to discuss the situation in Ukraine since the crisis began. Time and time again, the overwhelming majority of this Council has called for an end to the violence and destabilisation. Council members have consistently called for a de-escalation of tensions, for separatists to lay down their weapons and for genuine dialogue to commence. It is time for the equivocation and dissembling and false narratives of some to stop. In the 3 weeks since the Council last discussed the situation in Ukraine, the security situation in the east has become increasingly dire. Separatists have ignored repeated calls to disarm and have continued their attacks on Ukrainian military forces, facilities and border posts. 2 Ukrainian military cargo planes have been downed in eastern Ukraine in only the last week. The Ukrainian armed forces have responded firmly to these attacks. It has every right to restore law and order and has underlined its commitment to do so in a proportionate manner. Russia has a crucial role to play in de-escalating this persistently dangerous crisis. It must end its provocations and any support for separatist forces. It must control its border with Ukraine and prevent the flow of weapons, equipment and fighters from Russia into Ukraine. Russia must withdraw the large number of troops it has again amassed on the Ukrainian border. It must actively work to de-escalate tensions and use its considerable influence with separatist groups in Ukraine to that end. Further political efforts are essential. The 4-party talks in Berlin in the last 2 weeks showed some promise. The parties agreed on the need for a sustainable ceasefire, the resumption of the contact group, control of border crossing points monitored by the OSCE, and an extension of the work of the OSCE Observer Mission to include border monitoring activities. But we are yet to see results. These efforts must be redoubled. Mr. President, we had thought the situation in Ukraine had already caused too much tragedy. The horrific loss of flight MH17 has added immeasurably to that toll. It is time for the international community to stand as one, to ensure those responsible for this tragic crime are held to account, and to make every effort to bring to an end the violence and destabilisation in Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Australia. I give now the floor to the representative of Luxembourg. You have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie à mon tour le secrétaire général adjoint aux affaires politiques, Jeffrey Feltman, pour son exposé. À l'entame de mes propos, je souhaite exprimer, au nom du gouvernement et du peuple luxembourgeois, mes condoléances les plus sincères aux familles et aux proches des 298 personnes à bord de l'avion de Malaysia Airlines qui s'est écrasé hier après-midi près du village de Grabovo dans l'est de l'Ukraine. Parmi les victimes se trouve également une famille anglo-néerlandaise vivant au Luxembourg. Nos sympathies vont au gouvernement et au peuple des Pays-Bas, de la Malaisie, de l'Allemagne, de l'Australie, de la Belgique, du Canada, de l'Indonésie, de la Nouvelle-Zélande, des Philippines et du Royaume-Uni. La communauté internationale doit aux victimes de faire la lumière sur les circonstances qui ont mené à cet événement tragique. Une enquête internationale complète, transparente et indépendante doit être menée à bien dans les plus brefs délais. Un accès sûr et sans entrave doit être assuré aux enquêteurs internationaux, tout comme aux observateurs de l'OSCE et aux représentants des pays affectés. Toutes les parties concernées doivent pleinement coopérer à cette fin. Nous saluons la disponibilité des autorités ukrainiennes à cet égard. Ceux qui ont commis cet acte odieux doivent être tenus responsables. Monsieur le Président, Cette catastrophe s'inscrit dans un contexte de détérioration continue de la situation dans l'est de l'Ukraine. Jour après jour, nous recevons des rapports de civils tués dans les combats opposant les forces armées ukrainiennes et des groupes armés illégaux. Les milices séparatistes pro-russes continuent à occuper des bâtiments et des postes frontières, retiennent en otage des dizaines d'innocents et menacent l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine, sa souveraineté et son indépendance. Les conditions de vie des personnes vivant dans les zones affectées par les hostilités ne cessent de se détériorer et le nombre de déplacés internes augmente de manière constante. L'escalade de la violence des derniers jours, jusqu'à son tragique paroxysme d'hier, démontre une fois de plus que les groupes armés actifs dans l'est de l'Ukraine sont en réalité des forces paramilitaires bien équipées et bien entraînées, bénéficiant d'un soutien extérieur certain. Nous exhortons la Fédération de Russie à user activement de son influence sur les groupes armés illégaux et à faire en sorte que des armes et des combattants ne puissent plus franchir la frontière afin d'aboutir dans les meilleurs délais à une désescalade. Monsieur le Président, tout au long des derniers mois, l'Ukraine a démontré sa détermination à trouver une solution pacifique à la crise et à mettre en œuvre les accords conclus, notamment la déclaration conjointe adoptée le 17 avril à Genève entre l'Ukraine, la Russie, l'Union européenne et les États-Unis. L'Ukraine a mis en place un dialogue national et des garanties pour les minorités nationales. Une fois élu, le président Poroshenko a présenté un plan de paix très complet et mis en place une trêve unilatérale pour créer les conditions nécessaires à sa mise en œuvre. Malheureusement, les groupes armés illégaux, dont l'unique but est de déstabiliser l'Ukraine, ont choisi de ne pas saisir cette main tendue. Monsieur le Président, les efforts diplomatiques en vue de trouver une solution pacifique à la crise dans l'est de l'Ukraine doivent se poursuivre. À cet égard, l'engagement personnel du secrétaire général depuis le début de la crise est essentiel et doit se poursuivre. Il importe de trouver d'urgence un accord sur un cessez-le-feu réel et durable qui soit observé par toutes les parties afin de créer les conditions nécessaires à la mise en œuvre du plan de paix du président Poroshenko. Nous saluons les efforts déployés à cet égard par la France et l'Allemagne ainsi que par l'OSCE pour encourager le dialogue entre la Russie et l'Ukraine. Nous espérons vivement que ces efforts pourront contribuer à une désescalade et à mettre fin à une crise qui n'a que trop duré. La catastrophe aérienne d'hier a démontré les conséquences incalculables que cette crise risque d'avoir. Il est grand temps pour toutes les parties prenantes, y compris la Fédération de Russie, de mobiliser toutes les énergies pour mettre un terme à cette crise. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Luxembourg for her statement. Je vais donner maintenant la parole au représentant de France. Vous avez la parole.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie Monsieur Feldman de sa présentation. J'adresse mes plus sincères condoléances à tous les représentants permanents des pays qui ont perdu des compatriotes dans ce tragique événement. Je voudrais le faire en particulier à nos collègues néerlandais et malaisiens. Le deuil national des Pays-Bas est aussi le nôtre. Hier, un avion de la Malaysian Airlines transportant près de 300 passagers s'est écrasé en Ukraine dans la zone contrôlée par les séparatistes. Le président de la République française a fait part hier de son immense émotion à l'annonce de cette catastrophe. Je réitère aujourd'hui la solidarité de la France aux proches des passagers dans l'épreuve qu'ils traversent. Face à cette tragédie s'ajoutant à un tableau déjà chaotique, la France demande que tout soit mis en œuvre pour faire la lumière sur les circonstances qui ont provoqué cette tragédie. Nous appelons au lancement d'une enquête internationale indépendante qui puisse permettre d'établir des faits et d'en tirer toutes les conséquences. Nous demandons que toutes les mesures soient prises pour faciliter le travail des enquêteurs sur le terrain. Nous attendons en particulier des séparatistes qu'ils coopèrent avec les autorités ukrainiennes dans les recherches et permettent un accès sûr, immédiat et plein aux enquêteurs, conformément à ce qui a été décidé hier lors de la visioconférence entre le groupe de contact, Ukraine, Russie et OSCE, et les représentants séparatistes. Monsieur le Président, une lueur d'espoir avait commencé de poindre en Ukraine à la fin du mois dernier. Avec l'élection de M. Porochenko, un processus de normalisation politique voyait le jour. Un cessez-le-feu unilatéral décrété par Kiev le 20 juin laissait entrevoir un possible terme à la dégradation générale de la situation sécuritaire et humanitaire dans l'Est. Le président Porochenko prenait à cette même date l'initiative d'un plan de paix global en vue d'un règlement pacifique de la situation. De même, à la suite de la rencontre en marge des cérémonies du débarquement en Normandie, un processus d'échange quasi quotidien entre les présidents Porochenko et Poutine et la chancelière Merkel et le président Hollande permettait d'engager un dialogue utile. Une déclaration conjointe était d'ailleurs adoptée à Berlin le 2 juillet qui prévoit la recherche d'un cessez-le-feu durable à travers la rencontre du groupe de contact et des séparatistes, un renforcement des contrôles à la frontière russo-ukrainienne pour endiguer le flot d'armes et d'hommes et le concours de l'OSCE pour participer à cet effort. Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, la situation continue néanmoins de se dégrader. Depuis plusieurs jours, les combats se sont intensifiés dans l'est de l'Ukraine, en raison du refus des séparatistes de saisir la main tendue. Les exactions se font chaque jour plus meurtrières. Ainsi, des armes encore jamais utilisées sont entrées en action et ont frappé le territoire ukrainien. 2 avions ukrainiens ont été abattus à l'intérieur de leur propre espace aérien, ce qui ne peut être le fait que d'une partie dotée d'un armement antiaérien sophistiqué. Plus encore, cette dégradation sans précédent tient aussi à la présence de combattants armés venant de l'extérieur de l'Ukraine. La question des soutiens extérieurs, en termes de recrutement, de fourniture de matériel et d'entraînement, ne peut être évitée. La réponse n'est que trop évidente, elle est indéniable. Des systèmes d'armes d'une puissance de feu importante sont employés, rendant possible des dérapages tragiques. Ceux qui ont armé leurs utilisateurs portent la responsabilité de cet embrasement. Comme je l'ai déjà dit dans un précédent discours, lorsqu'on arme des voyous, on ne doit pas être surpris qu'ils se comportent comme des voyous. Monsieur le Président, tous ces événements pointent la nécessité pressante d'une pleine coopération internationale en vue de stabiliser l'Ukraine, ainsi que de garantir sa souveraineté et son intégrité territoriale. Nous appelons notamment à un engagement sincère de la Russie qui a fait défaut jusqu'à présent. Avant-hier, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement de l'Union européenne faisaient le constat que les nombreux appels adressés à Moscou pour cesser son action non coopérative n'avaient pas été entendus. C'est le sens de la décision de l'Union européenne de durcir ses sanctions. Le renforcement de ces sanctions n'a cependant qu'un seul et même but, la facilitation de l'émergence d'une solution politique. Notre priorité demeure d'abord d'enrayer l'escalade et d'obtenir la mise en place d'un cessez-le-feu durable respecté par toutes les parties. C'est pourquoi nous appelons la Russie à s'impliquer de façon constructive dans cette entreprise et à user de son influence sur les groupes armés illégaux pour déposer les armes et s'engager dans le dialogue. Les activités des séparatistes doivent cesser. En vue de freiner les flux d'armes et de combattants qui franchissent quotidiennement la frontière russo-ukrainienne, nous appelons à des négociations Ukraine-Russie-OSCE en vue de permettre le déploiement rapide d'une mission de surveillance à cette frontière. Monsieur le Président, que cette tragédie serve au moins d'avertissement à toutes les parties. Une fois l'épée tirée, elle frappe indistinctement et échappe à tout contrôle. Nous avons atteint ce moment. Il est peut-être encore possible d'éviter le pire. Je vous remercie.
Je remercie le représentant de France pour son intervention. I give now the floor to the representative of Jordan.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يعرب الأردن عن أسفه العميق إثر الحادث الإجرامي الذي أدى إلى إسقاط طائرة الخطوط الجوية الماليزية فوق شرق أوكرانيا يوم أمس، ونتقدم بأحر التعازي للحكومة الماليزية ولكافة عائلات الضحايا الذين قتلوا في هذا الحادث المفجع. يدعو الأردن إلى إجراء تحقيق مستقل ومستوف بحادثة الأمس، وبمشاركة السلطات الأوكرانية المختصة وبالتعاون مع الجهات ذات العلاقة بما فيها السلطات الماليزية. إن الوضع المتدهور في شرق أوكرانيا وباتخاذه لمنعطف جديد وخطير بعد حادثة الأمس يشكل مدعاة قلق للحكومة الأردنية، إذ أعرب الأردن وفي السابق عن قلقه الشديد لتدهور الأوضاع شرقي أوكرانيا، ونكرر دعوتنا لجميع الأطراف المؤثرة في أوكرانيا إلى ضرورة العمل لوقف حالة التدهور والضغط على المتمردين لنزع سلاحهم والانسحاب من المنشآت والمباني التي يحتلونها، وإيجاد الحلول السلمية للأزمة بهدف إعادة الاستقرار إلى شرق أوكرانيا. كما ندعو لضمان عودة النازحين إلى بيوتهم وبأسرع وقت ممكن. يحث الأردن جميع أطراف إعلان برلين المشترك وبيان جنيف بضرورة الالتزام بتنفيذ بنودهما، كما نحث جميع الأطراف المعنية بتسهيل عمل بعثة الأمم المتحدة لمراقبة حقوق الإنسان في أوكرانيا وخاصة في شرق أوكرانيا. يؤكد الأردن مجددا ضرورة احترام سيادة أوكرانيا ووحدة أراضيها وسلامتها الإقليمية. وختاما نشجع الحكومة الأوكرانية بالاستمرار في مساعيها التي تهدف إلى تعزيز المشاركة السياسية لجميع الأوكرانيين وكفالة تطبيق المواثيق الدولية لحقوق الإنسان دون تمييز، آخذين بعين الاعتبار مشاغل الأقليات والناطقين بغير اللغة الأوكرانية. وشكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Jordan for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Argentina. Have the floor, madam.
Gracias, señor presidente. Gracias, señor Jeffrey Feldman, por compartir con nosotros su informe sobre los últimos acontecimientos en Ucrania y traer la palabra y la predisposición siempre favorable a contribuir a la paz y al diálogo del secretario general de nuestra organización. Señor presidente, la Argentina, su gobierno, nuestro pueblo, expresa su conmoción, su dolor, su solidaridad, sus más profundas condolencias a las familias de las víctimas de la tragedia del vuelo de Malaysian Airlines que tuvo lugar el día de ayer. Expresamos nuestras condolencias al pueblo y gobierno de Ucrania, así como a los pueblos y gobiernos de los países cuyos ciudadanos perdieron sus vidas, y pedimos especialmente a nuestros colegas, los representantes especiales permanentes de los países que indudablemente encontraban a hermanos de su tierra en este vuelo, que hagan llegar nuestro abrazo, especialmente a las familias que vieron silenciadas las esperanzas de los niños. La gravedad de lo sucedido, sin duda, señor presidente, al igual que en el caso de los otros colegas, hace imperativo, y así lo expresa Argentina, llevar adelante una investigación internacional e imparcial que permita determinar de manera inequívoca y objetiva lo acontecido, establecer lo antes posible hechos y responsabilidades, permitiendo un acceso inmediato y sin obstáculos a los investigadores. Señor presidente, no es el tema de hoy, pero sin embargo, aun cuando se registraban indicios alentadores que permitían pensar que la crisis en Ucrania estaba entrando en una etapa de distensión, los temores de que continúen los enfrentamientos violentos no se han disipado. Y es tema de hoy volver a pedir que los grupos armados finalicen las acciones violentas, exigirlo, que terminen los actos unilaterales, las violaciones y abusos de los derechos humanos. Esto no hace más que profundizar la crisis y empeorar la situación, especialmente de la población civil, los inocentes. Señor presidente, reiteramos la necesidad de guardar el debido respeto a la conducción por parte de Ucrania de sus asuntos internos, sin intervención, sea militar, política o económica, en asuntos que son su jurisdicción. Argentina vela porque los principios del derecho internacional y de los derechos humanos, como la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, sean respetadas en su integridad por todos. Señor presidente, es este el momento de decir que son momentos dolorosos y difíciles. Por eso Argentina pide prudencia. No acompañaremos el lenguaje de las disputas geopolíticas, no acompañaremos los juegos de acusaciones estériles. Es tiempo de dolor, de reflexión y de búsqueda urgente de la verdad de lo sucedido y la determinación de sus responsables. Que las víctimas descansen en paz.
I thank the representative of Argentina for her statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Nigeria. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. First, I want to say to our colleagues whose citizens were involved, please, we convey our deepest condolences to your families, to your citizens, and to your government. Mr. President, yesterday at noon, the world watched in horror at the downing of a Malaysian jetliner. What happened yesterday seemed like an apocalyptic end of the world. I think Samantha described it somehow. This spectacle is graphically described in the book of Revelation as, and I quote, "A hail of fire mixed with blood fell upon the earth. The sun and the air were darkened," end quote. That was what I saw yesterday. Mr. President, no matter our religious beliefs, this scenario may become a self-fulfilling prophecy if states continue to choose to open or support theaters of war and conflict in every corner of the world. What will happen is that the world will self-annihilate. Enough is enough. The fact that the incident occurred as the plane flew over eastern Ukraine, which for some time now has been a zone of conflict, indicates that the accident may be connected in one way or the other to the conflict. But this is not the time for the blame game. If it is established that the plane was shot down deliberately or on purpose, then it would mark a new dimension in the Ukraine crisis, one that represents a grave threat to the safety of international civil aviation. At this point, it is of critical importance for the facts surrounding the crash to be well ascertained dispassionately, and in this regard, we would like to express our full support for an independent international investigation as called for by the Secretary General. Noting that the plane went down in an area under the control of armed rebel groups, we urge that they cooperate fully and unconditionally with an investigation into the crash. We have no doubt that without the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the widespread insecurity and lawlessness engendered by the activities of the rebel groups in the eastern part of the country, this tragic accident would not have occurred. We want to renew our call for the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine and a return to dialogue and negotiation within the framework of the Geneva Statement of 17th of April and the 2nd of July four-party talks in Berlin. Let us together resolve this issue. Let us together close this war front before its reverberations become manifest in other parts of the world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Nigeria for her statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, господин председатель. Прежде всего, мы хотели бы выразить искренние соболезнования родным и близким пассажиров и членов экипажа малазийского авиалайнера, полет которого оборвался в небе над Донецком, а также правительством тех стран, чьи граждане оказались в списке жертв этой трагедии. Необходимо беспристрастное, открытое расследование случившегося. Не следует оказывать давление на такое расследование, пытаясь предрешать его итоги громкими заявлениями и необоснованными инсинуациями. В столь сложной ситуации правильным, видимо, было бы создать международную комиссию под эгидой ИКАО. Господин председатель, у каждого нормального человека, уверен, в первую очередь возникает вопрос: зачем украинские авиадиспетчеры направили пассажирский самолет в зону боевых действий? В зону, где авиация систематически использовалась для нанесения ударов, в том числе и по гражданским объектам, и где поэтому работали средства ПВО. Обеспечение безопасного и эффективного использования гражданской авиации воздушного пространства государства – ответственность этого государства. В соответствии с международными правилами страна, на территории которой осуществляется полет, обязана предоставлять аэронавигационную информацию, необходимую для обеспечения безопасности воздушного сообщения. Международным правом прямо предусмотрены все возможности для своевременного закрытия государством опасных для полетов районов. Как представляется, требуется расследование не только самой катастрофы, но и того, насколько полно украинские авиационные власти выполнили свои обязанности и использовали указанные права. Сделали ли они все необходимое для того, чтобы в условиях развязанной Киевом военной кампании предотвратить произошедшую трагедию? Сегодня Киевом, наконец, было объявлено о полном закрытии воздушного пространства над районом проведения так называемой антитеррористической операции. Почему этого нельзя было сделать раньше, не дожидаясь сотен жертв? Господин председатель, в ходе нашего предыдущего заседания по Украине некоторые западные члены Совета умилялись по поводу сдержанности киевских властей в использовании силы. Вот они и проявили эту сдержанность во всей красе. В ход в Донецке и Луганске пошли и штурмовая авиация, и тяжелая артиллерия, и танки, и реактивные системы залпового огня, работающие, между прочим, по квадратам и имеющие неизбирательное действие. Карательная операция приобретает все более разрушительные масштабы для населения и гражданской инфраструктуры. Десятками гибнут мирные жители, в том числе и дети. Целенаправленно выводятся из строя транспортные и коммунальные артерии, объекты и объекты, медицинские учреждения. По данным ООНовцев, в зоне боевых действий на востоке Украины находится более 4,5 миллионов человек. При этом никаких мер по эвакуации гражданского населения из зоны боев киевскими властями не предпринимается. Люди вынуждены покидать районы боестолкновений самостоятельно, ежеминутно рискуя жизнью. Имеется множество свидетельств о том, что люди, бегущие от войны, а особенно ищущие спасения на территории России, подвергаются преднамеренным обстрелам украинских силовиков. К настоящему времени Россия приняла более 110 тысяч беженцев с востока Украины, и эта цифра продолжает расти с каждым днем. Эти данные подтверждаются Управлением Верховного комиссара ООН по делам беженцев. В связи с этим в 6 регионах России введен режим чрезвычайной ситуации. Приобрели регулярный характер артиллерийские и минометные обстрелы украинскими силовиками российской территории. Целями этих обстрелов становятся как пограничные КПП, так и дома мирных жителей. Среди наших граждан имеются убитые и раненые. Рассматриваем данные провокации как агрессивные акты украинской стороны в отношении суверенной российской территории и граждан Российской Федерации. Возлагаем всю ответственность за них на киевские власти и настаиваем на неукоснительном принятии украинской стороной решительных мер по пресечению подобного рода инцидентов. Господин председатель, мы неоднократно предупреждали о губительности попыток силового разрешения политического кризиса на Украине. Призывали к налаживанию взаимоуважительного инклюзивного диалога между всеми основными политическими силами, между Киевом и регионами. Однако на каждом перекрестке киевские власти выбирали неправильный путь, а их западные поводыри, в первую очередь я имею в виду, конечно, Соединенные Штаты Америки, подталкивали их к эскалации кризиса. Столкнувшись с катастрофическими последствиями такого курса, пытается свалить все на Россию. Отброшенным оказалось соглашение от 21 февраля. Отмахнулся Киев от дорожной карты, предложенной председательством ОБСЕ. По сути, невостребованным оказались Женевские заявления от 17 апреля и Берлинская декларация от 2 июля, хотя в их выработке участвовали представители киевских властей. Широко разрекламированный мирный план президента Порошенко на поверку оказался дымовой завесой для военных приготовлений и развертывания масштабной карательной операции. Киевские власти пошли по пути подавления инакомыслия. Сразу после февральского переворота несогласных в Киеве стали именовать бандитами и террористами, а потом и недочеловеками и насекомыми. Случайно ли на Пятом канале украинского телевидения, принадлежащем господину Порошенко, показывали рекламу вытравливания насекомых на фоне карты востока Украины? Холодят душу истории кровавых расправ над протестующими в Мариуполе и Одессе. Количество их жертв преуменьшается, подлинного расследования не проводится. Многими десятками исчисляются исчезнувшие люди из тех, кто политически оппонировал Киеву. Обещанная реформа Конституции готовится в тайне. Судя по всему, киевские власти хотят заручиться ее поддержкой со стороны европейских структур, а затем уже даровать ее благодарному народу. Кстати, по имеющимся сообщениям, перераспределение полномочий от президента парламенту, за что месяцами бился Майдан, не предусматривается. Можно ли удивляться, что население ряда регионов страны не приемлет такого ведения дел? Политические представители этих регионов хорошо известны. Это и политики, давно участвующие в политической жизни Украины, и народные представители, выдвинутые на политическую авансцену протестными движениями в последние месяцы. Вовлечение их в диалог позволило бы избежать нынешнего обострения кризиса. Киев же выбрал метод арестов, избиений, угроз. Господин председатель, применительно к украинскому кризису международные институты оказались не на высоте положения. Причина в наших западных партнерах. Шумят много, а делать для урегулирования ситуации ничего не хотят. Трудно идет работа в ОБСЕ. Здесь, в Совете Безопасности ООН, российская делегация трижды предлагала серьезно заняться выработкой резолюции, которая помогла бы остановить насилие на Украине. Но западные коллеги реагировали на наши предложения с вызывающим цинизмом. Мол, не можем поступиться принципами. Правительство вольно делать, что заблагорассудится. Говорят, что из принципа можно и застрелиться. Но зачем же в жертву своим геополитическим амбициям приносить интересы целого народа, народа Украины? Господин председатель, карательную операцию на востоке Украины необходимо прекратить незамедлительно. Переговорный выход из кризиса еще возможен. Надо, наконец, сделать правильный выбор. Я благодарю вас, господин председатель.
Representative of Russian Federation for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Chile.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Quisiera empezar expresando en nombre de mi país nuestra indignación por el ataque perpetrado ayer en que el vuelo MH17 de Malaysian Airlines fue derribado en el este de Ucrania y donde fallecieron 298 personas, incluidos menores de edad. Condenamos este acto en los términos más enérgicos y hacemos llegar nuestra solidaridad y condolencia a los familiares de las víctimas y a los gobiernos con ciudadanos entre sus víctimas. Ninguna causa puede justificar un acto de esta magnitud y crueldad. Seguimos con atención la información que va surgiendo sobre lo ocurrido y en este contexto hacemos un llamado a que se lleve a cabo una investigación amplia, transparente e independiente de conformidad con las normas internacionales de la aviación civil, de manera de asegurar la rendición de cuentas correspondientes. Igualmente, es necesario que se entreguen todas las facilidades y se garantice la seguridad para el acceso inmediato de investigadores al lugar del siniestro con el objeto de determinar con certeza su causa. Este tipo de actos no puede quedar en la impunidad y sus autores deben enfrentar la justicia. Los familiares de las víctimas tienen el derecho a conocer la verdad. Es por ello que instamos a todos los Estados, de conformidad con sus obligaciones emanadas del derecho internacional y las resoluciones pertinentes del Consejo de Seguridad, a cooperar activamente con las autoridades pertinentes. Señor presidente, el derribamiento de este avión en una zona en la que se vive una alta tensión política reviste el peligro de incrementar la violencia actual y de incorporar a nuevos actores. Es por ello que ahora, más que nunca, insistimos en nuestro llamado a que las partes ejerzan el máximo de moderación a fin de contener la crisis en el este de Ucrania. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Chile for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank Undersecretary General Feldman for his briefing on this tragic incident in Ukraine. The Republic of Korea expresses utmost shock and outrage over the downing of the Malaysian Airlines passenger plane in eastern Ukraine yesterday. We deplore the loss of nearly 300 innocent civilian lives aboard the commercial airliner. On behalf of the people and the government of the Republic of Korea, I extend my deepest condolences to the people and governments of Australia, Belgium, Canada, Germany, Indonesia, Malaysia, Netherlands, the Philippines, and the United Kingdom and other affected countries. Our heart goes out to the families of the victims at this difficult time. A thorough, independent international investigation involving, among others, the ICAO must be conducted immediately. Whoever is responsible for this tragedy must be held fully accountable. If this incident turns out to have been caused by a deliberate attack, the Republic of Korea, as a former victim of hostilities against a civilian airliner ourselves, believes that the international community should do everything in our power to bring the perpetrators to justice as quickly as possible. No one should be allowed to get away with killing so many innocent people who have nothing to do with what is happening on the ground, no matter what the reason is. Having said that, we support the ongoing efforts to bring stability to Ukraine, in particular those of the United Nations, the European Union, OSCE, and bilateral partners. Such efforts aimed at de-escalating the violence in eastern Ukraine should continue despite the daunting challenges. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Rwanda. I thank Jeffrey Feltman, Under Secretary General for Political Affairs, for his availability and for his detailed briefing, despite a short notice. Thank you very much for that. Allow me first of all to express my deep sorrow over the loss of 298 lives, including 80 children, killed in the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 that was shot down in eastern Ukraine. On behalf of the government of Rwanda, I present my deepest condolences to the families who lost their loved ones, as well as to the people and the government of the victims. The loss of those innocent civilians is beyond comprehension. Their lives were caught in the middle of a crisis that this very council was unable to take action on since it started in February this year. But now, with the shooting down of a civilian airplane carrying civilians, the Ukrainian crisis is no longer a conflict between the Ukrainian military and armed separatists. This conflict has crossed the red line by endangering all of our lives, as it did for the men, women, and children from different countries. Thank you for the music. I was saying that this conflict has crossed a red line by endangering all of our lives, as it did for the men, women, and children from different countries who were in the MH17. We condemn in the strongest terms this reckless attack, and we call for a comprehensive, independent, and international investigation in accordance with international guidelines as agreed upon in the press statement adopted this morning. This should establish the responsibilities so that the perpetrators can be held accountable. In this context, we further urge all parties to cease fire, to fully cooperate with the investigation, and to grant unhindered access to the crash site in order to allow international investigators to carry out their work. We note that the criminal act of yesterday follows the shooting down of a Ukrainian jet fighter on Wednesday and that of a military cargo on Monday. The frequent use of surface-to-air missiles in the past few months poses the question of access to those weapons now capable of downing a civilian airplane flying over more than 30,000 feet. Therefore, the Security Council and the larger international community can no longer afford to turn a blind eye on this matter. It is unfortunate that this tragic event came at a time when national and regional efforts were underway to finding a political and diplomatic solution to the Ukrainian crisis. This act undermines valuable initiatives of the trilateral contact group of senior representatives of Ukraine, the Russian Federation, and the Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe, who were making all necessary efforts for a resumption of consultations with separatists in eastern of Ukraine. On Tuesday, the group had reconfirmed its support to President Petro Poroshenko's peace plan, as well as to the commitment for sustainable ceasefire stated in the joint declaration in Berlin on 2nd July 2014 of Foreign Affairs Ministers of Germany, France, and the Russian Federation and Ukraine. To conclude, let me renew our call to the armed groups to respect the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. They must lay down their weapons and engage in constructive dialogue with the Ukrainian government. In the same vein, we urge all parties to immediately cease fire and support the ongoing efforts to de-escalate the crisis and bring peace to Ukraine and the region. The shooting down of a civilian plane over the conflict in eastern Ukraine is a stark reminder of the moral responsibility of Security Council members to put aside their division on this crisis and hold the perpetrators of this criminal act to account and uphold its mandate of maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for convening this meeting. I thank Mr. Jeffrey Feltman, the Secretary General, for his briefing. I would like to start with addressing my government's deep sorrow and sincere condolences to all the missions whose citizens were killed in the terrible crash of Boeing of Malaysian Airlines. Ukraine shares the pain of the loss and grieves with the bereaved families and friends and extends its profound sympathy to those affected by the accident. Today, whole Ukraine is mourning. Ukrainians are approaching the embassies of Netherlands, Malaysia, Australia, Indonesia, United Kingdom, Germany, Belgium, Philippines, Canada in order to lay down flowers and express their sorrow. The Ukrainian authorities have already addressed international organizations, ICAO, Interpol, and others, to undertake a thorough international investigation of the accident. We believe that impartial investigation will bring the truth and all perpetrators will be punished. Yesterday, Ukrainian leadership announced basic version of what has happened with Boeing. It was stated that it was an act of terror. The position of the government is based on the coinciding data from different intelligence and open sources. These data are: the aircraft was shot down above the territory temporarily controlled by the terrorists. Several days before, around the same location, 2 Ukrainian jets were shot down and terrorist leaders claimed their responsibility for these acts. Interception of telephone conversations between the terrorist leaders and their coordinator, the Russian military intelligence colonel Vasily Geranin, confirms that terrorists are standing behind this crime. This conversation is recorded and the Secretariat promised to convey to the members of the Security Council. Immediately after the crash, military leader of the terrorists, Igor Girkin, Strelkov of the Russian origin, commented boasting in social network on having shot down what he believed was the Ukrainian jet by saying, I quote, "In Torres, Ukrainian An-26 was shot down. Its crashes are lying somewhere near the coal mine Progress." End of quote. We have warned everyone, continuing the quote, "We have warned everyone, do not fly in our skies." End of quote. To target and shoot down a plane on such a high altitude of 10 kilometers would only be possible using sophisticated anti-aircraft systems such as SA-11, known as Buk, or similar. That is confirmed both from radio interceptions of terrorist leaders and by visual photo and video recording got from citizens of the local cities that terrorists have at least 2 SA systems. The question is where they got this sophisticated air defense system from. Again, interceptions, photos, and confessions of detained terrorists, including 2 recently detained Russian citizens who were going to join terrorists as experts in adjustment of fire, are telling that the Buk system arrived from Russia. All these and other evidences and materials will be provided to the international investigation. This tragedy would not have been possible if Russia did not support the terrorists and did not provide sophisticated anti-aircraft missile systems were not supplied to terrorists from Russia. Ukrainian mission to the United Nations many times addressed the Security Council and all UN member states with information about Russia supporting the terrorists in eastern Ukraine. Just yesterday, we presented new proofs to UN-accredited media. Numerous supplies of weapons of Russian origin used by terrorists in Donbass, which has been documented by Ukrainian intelligence agencies, media, and general public, are no longer a secret to anyone. A large exhibition of the confiscated modern weapons withdrawn by the Ukrainian military forces from the terrorist groups took place in Kiev a few days ago. In most cases, actual military units of the Russian armed forces are specified as the origin of those weapons. The documentary could be available on the website of Ukrainian mission as well as from the yesterday's press conference of mine. You can find it in the website of the United Nations. We have been raised several times here in this hall our concern that Russian nationals directly participate in the destabilization of the situation in eastern Ukraine. Today, some information was given by the colleagues. The leaders of Lugansk proclaimed republic, Donetsk proclaimed republic, their military commanders, all of them, they are of Russian origin. Recruiting efforts from illegal armed groups fighters are expanding inside Russia, and they are looking for volunteers with experience operating heavy weapons such as tanks and air defense. Russia has allowed establishing recruiting offices in Moscow and Rostov, which are openly operating on recruiting and sending Russian nationals to eastern regions of Ukraine. We demonstrated it yesterday at the press conference, all the sites who were inviting and still inviting these recruits. Numerous groups of the Russian paramilitary formations, Russian Cossacks, are actively supporting terrorists in spreading terror and chaos in the eastern Ukraine. Throughout the whole period of this artificially created conflict supported by Russia, it has never publicly called on its citizens to refrain from joining illegal armed groups on the territory of Ukraine. This fact speaks for itself. Paragraph 2 of Article 208 of the Criminal Code of Russia Federation states that, I quote, participation in armed groups which are not determined by the federal law, as well as participation in such armed groups on the territory of foreign state with a purpose contrary to the interests of Russian Federation, is punished by 5 to 10 year imprisonment. End of quote. Since no Russian national has been brought to justice for such actions, there is only one conclusion: their participation in illegal armed groups on the territory of Ukraine doesn't contradict the interests of the Russian Federation. Mr. President, the situation on the Ukrainian-Russian state border has significantly deteriorated in the recent days as a result of systematic violations coming from the Russian side of the border, as well as provocative actions by armed terrorist groups in the pre-border areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Several times a day, columns of military vehicles and Russian mercenaries undertake attempts to break through the Ukrainian state border from this side of Russia. These attempts are actively facilitated by Russian border protection units. Anti-terrorist forces in Ukraine were repeatedly shelled from the territory of Russia. Ukraine has all documented evidence of those facts for the appropriate international response. Number of provocations on the Ukrainian-Russian state border has increased substantially. Illegal armed groupings systematically fire towards the territory of Russia in order to create false image of Ukrainian military firing. This has caused the death of a Russian citizen. The Russian side accused the armed forces of Ukraine in shelling on June 28 this year the territory of Russia, namely Vasatskaya village, mine number 24 of Krasno-Solunsky district of Rostov region, and border checkpoint Hukovo. Ukrainian armed forces have never attacked or fired to the territory of Russia. All such provocations are committed by pro-Russian terrorists in order to find grounds for further escalation. It sounds like a new provocation, today's statement of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, on the possibility to provide strikes against territory of Ukraine. Mr. President, today colleagues presented some evidences of the deterioration on the Ukrainian-Russian borders. Every day during the month of July, we observed such kind of violations, including the shot down Ukrainian jets. Using this opportunity, I would like to attract once again your attention, distinguished members of the Security Council, on that Russia continues to redeploy new forces extremely close to the Ukrainian border. As of July 14, total number of Russian armed forces groups in the regions bordering with Ukraine has been significantly increased and comprises 33 battalion tactical groups, totally of at least 40,000 troops. Directly around Ukraine, including Transnistria, up to 18,000 troops. In occupied territory of Crimea, up to 21,000 troops. Those and similar actions constitute a flagrant violation by Russia of its obligation under the UN Charter and other universally recognized principles and norms of international law. Those actions are incompatible with obligations of Russian Federation under the Geneva Agreements of 17 April and the Berlin Declaration of 2nd June. Despite all international efforts fueled by strong Ukrainian will to avoid further escalation and reinforced by presidential peace plan, foreign terrorists and their Russian patrons have no intention to leave us in peace and lay down arms. We are still struggling against high-capacity military saboteurs who are willing to shred Ukraine and to create gray zones of chaos and instability. Ukraine demands that the Russian side immediately cease provocations on the state border of Ukraine, stop hindering efforts of the Ukrainian side and international community to put an end to terrorism and other violence in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, to return to the President Poroshenko peace plan, withdraw its forces from Ukrainian border, and stop threatening peace and security in our country, region, and the world as a whole. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Malaysia. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, allow me to congratulate you and the Republic of Rwanda on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month. And I thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Council on Ukraine. I wish to also thank Mr. Jeffrey Feltman, Under Secretary General for Political Affairs, for his briefing earlier. For my delegation, the convening of this meeting is indeed timely, given the tragic incident involving Malaysian Airlines Flight MH17. Malaysia is deeply touched by the expressions of condolence, sympathy, and support from across the world. At this difficult time, we wish to also express our profound sorrow and convey our deepest sympathy and condolences to the families and friends of those on board MH17. Mr. President, Malaysia is shocked and distraught by the downing of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17. The scheduled flight, which departed Amsterdam yesterday afternoon at Amsterdam local time, was expected to arrive Kuala Lumpur International Airport this morning. Unfortunately, it crashed near the town of Torres in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine. 298 people perished in this incident. Those who perished were from the Netherlands, 189, Malaysia, 44, Australia, 27, Indonesia, 12, United Kingdom, 9, Germany, 4, Belgium, 4, Philippines, 3, Canada, 1, New Zealand, 1, and 4 passengers whose nationalities have yet to be verified. The Amsterdam-Kuala Lumpur route, which regularly crossed Ukrainian airspace, was one of the most popular routes for the airlines. According to the International Air Transport Association, ITA, at the time when contact with MH was lost, the aircraft was flying over non-restricted airspace. Furthermore, the International Civil Aviation Organization had declared the flight path to be safe. Malaysia Airlines also confirmed that the aircraft did not make any distress calls. The government of Malaysia has taken immediate action to dispatch a special Malaysia Disaster Assistance and Rescue Team, SMART, to Kiev, comprising personnel from SMART Team, the Royal Malaysian Air Force, Malaysian Airlines, Department of Civil Aviation, as well as medical staff. In addition, 40 Malaysian Airlines staff have been dispatched to Amsterdam to support the family and next of kin of the victims. In this connection, Malaysia welcomes the pledges of support and assistance made by other countries to aid the search, rescue, recovery, and investigation efforts. Mr. President, yesterday, Prime Minister Najib has spoken to President Poroshenko of Ukraine, Prime Minister Rutte of the Netherlands, President Obama of the United States, and President Putin of Russia. In those conversations, Prime Minister Najib has stressed that if indeed MH17 had been shot down, the perpetrators must be swiftly brought to justice. Malaysia strongly condemns any such action in the strongest possible term, as it would be a flagrant violation of international law and an outrage against human decency. Malaysia demands a full, independent, and transparent international investigation into the incident, involving the relevant international authorities, including the International Civil Aviation Organization. I wish to inform the meeting that Malaysia has been formally invited by Ukraine authorities to take part in the investigation, and we will be sending 2 representatives to Kiev as soon as possible. We urge the parties in conflict in the area of the crash site to provide their fullest cooperation. Such cooperation also entails facilitating the safe and unhindered access for the investigation and humanitarian personnel to carry out their mission, including collecting the relevant data, evidence, remains, and personal effects of the victims. We wish to underscore that there must be no interference at the crash site or movement of debris from the area, including the flight data recorder or black box. The integrity of the crash site must be preserved. Malaysia also urges the Security Council to undertake the necessary measures to ensure the safety and security of humanitarian and investigative personnel in the crash site in order for them to discharge their duties and responsibilities. Mr. President, further facts remain unknown at this point, but the fact that the plane might have been shot down has made the matter even more painful for us. Again, this is a grave reminder of how escalation of dispute and threat to international peace and security could claim innocent lives in a most tragic and senseless manner. In this regard, we urge the Security Council to step up its role in facilitating a peaceful resolution to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, with a view to preventing the reoccurrence of such a tragic incident. In concluding, Mr. President, on behalf of the government and the people of Malaysia, I wish to reiterate our deep appreciation for all the expressions of support, sympathy, and solidarity in these difficult and trying times. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Malaysia for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of the Netherlands.
Mr. President, thank you for granting me the opportunity to deliver a message of my minister under these exceptional circumstances. And I would like to thank the members of this Council for their words of compassion and condolences as just expressed. Mr. President, yesterday almost 300 innocent men, women and children lost their lives on board Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur when the plane crashed on Ukrainian soil. This horrible event has shocked the world and has deeply saddened all countries that have lost compatriots. Our thoughts and prayers are with all those who mourn the death of loved ones, wherever their cradle may have stood. Mr. President, at least 189 victims were Dutch nationals. Today, many thousands in my country, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, grieve for the loss of parents, children, loved ones, friends, co-workers. This is a dark hour in our national history, and we are a nation in shock and in tears. But we are also a nation united in our determination to seek the truth about what happened. We call on all parties who have any influence on the matter to grant unfettered access to the crash site to emergency responders and investigators alike. We call on this Council, the world's highest authority, to mandate a full, thorough and impartial international investigation into the exact circumstances surrounding the crash of flight MH17. All relevant materials recovered from the site, including the airplane's black boxes, should be made available to the international investigation immediately and without interference. Mr. President, should an investigation show that this tragedy is the result of the use of weapons, the Netherlands will condemn this despicable act in the strongest terms and will demand for all those responsible, both directly and indirectly, to be held accountable and to be brought to justice. This is our moral obligation to the memory of the victims, and it is our duty in the face of international law and justice. My country will not rest until justice is served. Mr. President, we want to bring the victims' remains home to their loved ones as soon as possible. We ask the United Nations to help us achieve this. Those who mourn, wherever they may reside, deserve to know what caused the deaths of their loved ones. Our nations deserve to know what happened. The world has a right to know. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Netherlands for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Indonesia. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this meeting. As a matter of priority, I wish to express on behalf of the government and the people of Indonesia our deepest condolences to all affected nations, especially to our good neighbor Malaysia, over the death of 298 civilian passengers and crew of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 that crashed yesterday as it was flying over eastern Ukraine. As you may be aware, 12 Indonesian citizens have been confirmed as being among the deceased. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families of the victim. Allow me also to take this opportunity to sincerely thank delegations that have expressed their sympathies and condolences to Indonesia. Mr. Chairman, according to various sources and reports, the airplane was presumably shot down by a surface-to-air missile. If this is indeed the case, such an heinous act is tantamount to a grave violation of international law, in particular international humanitarian law. In this regard, Indonesia calls upon the Security Council to take immediate steps to enable a thorough, transparent, and independent international investigation be conducted upon this horrendous incident. Indonesia stands ready to join and support such investigation. If the investigation concludes that the crash was indeed intentionally caused by human factors, be it a missile strike or otherwise, Indonesia demands that the perpetrators of such a heinous and inhuman crime be brought to justice under the fullest extent of the law. As a precautionary measure, yesterday, my president instructed all Indonesian airlines to exercise utmost caution and to avoid the airspace in and around conflict areas, including that of Ukraine. In conclusion, Mr. President, as a member of the ASEAN family, Indonesia reiterates its solidarity with the government and the people of Malaysia, as well as with the countries whose citizens have fallen victim to this tragedy. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Indonesia for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Philippines. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, for calling this emergency meeting. The Philippines received with great sadness confirmation that Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 crashed in eastern Ukraine on 17 July 2014. That's yesterday. The downing of the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 is most shocking and confounding event. Malaysia Airlines Flight 710 had on board 298 irreplaceable lives. Today we are united in grief. The Philippines conveys its most heartfelt condolences to the families as well as the governments and peoples of those who lost their lives in the accident. Today we are together in denouncing this regrettable incident. The Philippines condemns in the strongest possible terms the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. The incident is revolting, particularly in view of the troubling and disconcerting reports that the crash was occasioned by a targeted move. The Philippines joins the call to immediately secure the area of the crash site, to launch an independent, transparent, and international investigation into the incident, and to provide full and safe access to investigators to the scene of the crash to enable them to swiftly conclude and report on the results of the investigation. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Philippines for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Belgium. You have the floor now.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion de participer à cette réunion. Je remercie également le secrétaire général adjoint, Monsieur Feldman, pour son briefing. Tout d'abord, au nom du gouvernement et des citoyens belges, je souhaiterais exprimer mes condoléances les plus sincères au gouvernement de la Malaisie, ainsi qu'aux familles et aux amis des 298 personnes qui étaient à bord de l'avion de Malaysia Airlines abattu au-dessus de l'est de l'Ukraine. Parmi les victimes se trouvaient 5 ressortissants belges. Nos pensées vont à tous ceux qui sont en deuil aujourd'hui, et en particulier aux familles et aux amis, ainsi qu'au gouvernement des Pays-Bas, un pays qui nous est proche. Comme d'autres avant moi, la Belgique lance un appel à toutes les parties pour qu'elles assurent un accès complet au site de la catastrophe, non seulement pour les équipes de secours, mais aussi pour les enquêteurs. Une enquête internationale complète, minutieuse et impartiale doit avoir lieu pour déterminer les circonstances exactes de la catastrophe du vol MH17. À cet égard, la Belgique soutient la proposition formulée par l'Australie que le Conseil de sécurité adopte une résolution qui souligne la nécessité que l'accès au site soit garanti et qu'une enquête internationale complète, indépendante, ait lieu. Nous devons aux victimes et à leurs familles, mais aussi à nous-mêmes, de faire toute la lumière sur ce qui s'est passé hier dans l'est de l'Ukraine. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Belgium for her statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Canada. Have the floor, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et nous vous remercions pour l'opportunité de prendre la parole, même dans une journée de profonde tristesse pour toute la communauté internationale. Mr. President, Canadians are shocked and saddened by the terrible loss of life in the shooting down of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 over the eastern Ukraine. With evidence mounting that the airliner was brought down by a surface-to-air missile, we are increasingly convinced that this is not only a tragedy, but also very likely the result of an outrageous crime perpetrated against hundreds of innocent civilians of many nationalities. Canada calls on all parties to the conflict in Ukraine to cooperate fully with an international investigation into this incident. Both Ukrainian authorities and international experts must be permitted full and secure access to the crash site and must be provided access to all relevant data and evidence pertaining to the downing of this aircraft. We commend the government of Ukraine for launching an investigation, and we thank the people of Ukraine for their sincere expressions of condolence to all those affected by this tragedy, including Canada. And Canada stands ready to provide whatever support it can to assist authorities in determining the cause of the crash. Mr. President, Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 was brought down in a region of Ukraine embroiled in armed conflict. This is a conflict generated by and perpetuated by Russia's provocative military actions against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of Ukraine. We once again call on Russia to cease its political, financial, and material support to armed insurgents in eastern Ukraine. Following the loss of so many lives aboard Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, the grave international consequences of Russian-sponsored violence in eastern Ukraine are now plain for all to see. I thank you, Mr. President. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
I thank the representative of Canada for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of New Zealand. Have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this debate and for allowing New Zealand to make this statement. I will be brief, but discussion of an international incident which brings death to New Zealanders does demand some comment. New Zealand joins with others in expressing its deepest sympathy to the family, the friends and the colleagues of all those who have died. We also express our solidarity with our close friend Malaysia, indeed with all countries whose people have died. Our thoughts and prayers are with them all at this incredibly sad time. And we express outrage at the mounting evidence that this totally unnecessary, this totally avoidable tragedy resulted from a surface-to-air missile strike. If that evidence is confirmed, this is a grave crime which demands an international, thorough, credible and independent investigation. Particularly, Mr. President, we call for protection of the integrity of the crash site. So New Zealand welcomes the calls for such investigation from the Secretary-General, from this Council and from many others. The circumstances of this tragedy, the catastrophic nature of its occurrence in a conflict zone, mean that the international community, particularly those like New Zealand and others who have lost nationals, has a right to demand such investigation. Any party with relevant information which can help in that process must offer their proactive assistance and cooperation, and perpetrators must be brought to justice. No qualifications, no ifs, no buts,
no maybes. Mr. President, the situation in Ukraine has now gone beyond the dangerous. It now kills people from other parts of the world with no direct involvement in a local conflict. This morning, sir, families in New Zealand and many, many other countries are waking up to the tragic reality that they have lost loved ones to a conflict that threatens international peace and security and demands the ongoing attention of this United Nations Security Council.
I thank the representative of New Zealand for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Viet Nam. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It was with profound grievance when we were informed of the crash of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 in eastern Ukraine on the 17th of July 2014, which caused the tragic loss of lives of all passengers and crew members. My delegation has just been informed that of the 4 victims whose nationalities were not yet identified when the distinguished ambassador of Malaysia spoke, 3 of them are Vietnamese. We would like to convey our deepest condolences and sympathy to the governments, people, and the bereaved families. At this moment, as a member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Vietnam stands in its solidarity with the government and people of Malaysia. The President, Prime Minister, and Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Vietnam have conveyed their deepest condolences to the government and people of Malaysia. We call for the expeditious, effective, and responsible actions by relevant authorities and parties towards the families of the victims and to adequately address other related issues. Vietnam also requests a prompt and transparent investigation into the incident. We hope that the incident would soon be settled with efforts and determination by relevant authorities and parties. Vietnam is closely following the situation in Ukraine and is extremely concerned over the recent complicated developments in the eastern provinces of Ukraine. We sincerely hope that all concerned parties exercise restraint and avoid any action that could aggravate the situation and cause casualties to civilians while making efforts through peaceful dialogue to find solutions ensuring the legitimate interests of all parties and meeting the people's aspiration for peace, stability, and development in Ukraine and in the region. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
So I thank the representative of Vietnam for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The Security Council has thus concluded the present stage of its consideration of the item on its agenda. The meeting is adjourned.